Hi, this is Terry with Tree Marie Soapworks. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make these bars. Usually I show you fancier bars, but today I'm going to show you this rustic bar. I think it really goes with the theme of honeybees, and I think it's equally as beautiful, so let's get started. First I start with my distilled water, and I use about 1/3 of my water weight in distilled water ice cubes. I do this mainly because it cuts down on fumes, and also it does help it cool down a little more quickly. I'm using powdered sugar in this recipe, and I dissolve it in my distilled water before I add my lye, and I'm using it at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. And the reason I use it is it cuts down on acceleration. Once the sugar is completely dissolved in the water, I measure out my sodium hydroxide and then I add that to my distilled water. I carefully stir it until it's dissolved, and then I set it aside under a vent fan that's away from any children or pets. Normally I measure my sodium lactate in this step and I set it aside with my cooling lye water, but today I decided not to use sodium lactate because I'm using beeswax and that's a good hardener. Now that my lye water is cooling, I start to measure my hard oils, and I start with my coconut oil and then I melt that. While the coconut oil is melting in the microwave, I start to measure my liquid oil, starting with my castor oil and then my olive oil. Once the coconut oil is completely melted, I add my palm kernel flakes and I stir those in to try to dissolve them, but the melting point for these is 102 degrees Fahrenheit, so I may need to microwave this again. Palm kernel flakes add a hardness to your bar and also a shine, and they can cause your bar to be brittle if you use them higher than 15%. And today I'm only using them at 10.5%. Also, palm kernel flakes can cause acceleration, so you have to be careful with what recipe you're using for what design. Next I add my cocoa butter, and I really like working with cocoa butter. It adds a hardness to the bar and also it adds moisture to the bar. Next I'm adding beeswax to my recipe, and this gets added just when you're figuring your oils for your recipe. This is added at 0.5% of your total oil weight. Beeswax has a pretty high melting point, so I had to microwave this again to get it melted. Now that the beeswax is completely melted, I add my melted palm oil. Next we'll be working on some of the additives, starting with the honey, and I use that at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Honey is not the easiest to work with, but it is really good for your bar because it helps create a lather, and there's other benefits to honey as well. But one of the things you have to watch out for is that it causes your bar to heat up because of the sugars in it. So you just have to be careful. But when I'm using these single cavity molds, you don't really have to worry about that because they have a hard time heating up and going through gel anyway, so I don't worry about that in these kind of molds. My next additive is bee pollen, and it's from brambleberry, and I use this at a rate of 1.5 teaspoons per pound of oils. Now all of these additives that are measured in teaspoons can be figured using Elements Bath & Body's colorant calculator. You would just go to the bottom calculator, and this is good for additives as well as colorants. It's just if it's measured in teaspoons per pound of oils. So we're using 33.5 ounces of oil, so you put that in, and then this is for the whole recipe, so you're going to put in 100% in the percent part, and then you just need to know your rate. So I used 1.5 teaspoons for the rate for the bee pollen, but I used 1 teaspoon for the rate for the honey. And if you were using sodium lactate, you would use 1 teaspoon, and I used the sugar at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. So this works for your additives too. It's just as long as it's figured in teaspoons per pound of oils or per pound of soap. Okay, my next additive is calendula flower, and these are dried, and I chopped them up even finer, and I got these from Brambleberry, and I used them at a rate of 1.5 teaspoons per pound of oils. I'm using raw honeycomb fragrance, and I'm also adding a little bit of the tenfold orange essential oil from Brambleberry as well. Next I'm using titanium dioxide, and this is already dispersed, 1 part titanium dioxide to 3 parts olive oil, and I'm using this at a rate of 0.75 teaspoons per pound of oils. Once I get these ingredients mixed together and I'm happy with them, I add them to my melted hard oils, and then I add my liquid oils to those, and then I use my stick blender to make sure everything is incorporated. I'm using aloe vera liquid from Brambleberry, and this stuff is great for lather. It makes the most wonderful lather. And what I did in the beginning when I measured my water is I subtracted 2 ounces of water. So I'm adding 2 ounces of this aloe vera liquid. So if you want to do this with the aloe vera liquid or with beer or some other liquid you want to add, you can go as low as a 1-to-1 ratio when you're mixing your water with your lye. And then the rest of that amount in liquid you can add later to your oils in the amount of whatever is left over. So you never go below a 1-to-1 ratio of liquid to lye. And in this case, I still use 2 ounces more water than lye. I decided to use a little yellow oxide to add to my color. I just use it at a rate of 0.125 teaspoons per pound of oils. Oxides tend to be a little clumpy, so this palette knife and a little olive oil work very well to get the clumps out. Once I'm confident that all the clumps are out, I add this to my oil mixture. And you can see I got a little on the counter, and I just want to show you how I got that off, because it can stain, and all you have to do is add a little bit of oil to it and it comes off really easy. So I just dabbed on a little olive oil and then it wipes right off. Next, I strain my lye solution into my oil solution. I stick blend this until medium trace. Next, I just make sure and have all of my molds ready, and all of these molds are from Brambleberry. 2 of them are new, and I listed in the description below a link to where you can find these. While I'm pouring, I just kind of tap it down and make sure I'm getting the soap into all the corners and avoiding any air pockets. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to package these soaps because I usually do the regular rectangular bar, but if you have any ideas, please leave a comment below. Also, if you've learned something today or if you've been inspired, please just give a comment below and let me know what it is. And I banged down each one of these molds again just to try to ensure there won't be any air bubbles in the final product. I'm not putting these in the oven because of the pollen and the honey that would cause it to heat up, so I'm just covering it and hoping it goes through gel, but it really doesn't matter on this because these are not going to be cut open, so you won't see any partial gel if there is any. So now that I'm just cleaning these bars, let me tell you what I learned from this batch. After 2 days, I popped these soaps out of the mold and they did come out fine, but they were a little soft, and I feel like I really should have used sodium lactate after all. Also, the mold with the most intricate pattern had the most air bubbles, and I think if I would have just put a slight amount of soap in there and then banged that down and then add the rest of the soap, I think I would have got those outer circles that are fairly thin all filled in. I really like how these came out, and I would do this again, and I love seeing those natural colors. The pinks that come from the clays, the light yellows and the light greens like the moss color, and some of that natural blue. I just love those gorgeous colors, and those bars are the most simple bars, but they just look gorgeous. So I would ask any beginning soap maker, don't get in too much of a rush to do fancy designs. Start with a one color bar, and they're just gorgeous in their simplicity. Enjoy that for a while, and then you can move on to something more complicated, but get your skills before you advance to something that you're not quite ready for. I've had a lot of people ask what I do with these soap balls, and we do use them, and I have an aunt that really loves them, and we use them as hand soaps. A lot of people said they would buy them, but somehow I don't feel right about that. So comment below and let me know what you think I should do with my extra soap balls. Thank you so much to those of you who checked out my website and who placed an order this week. I really appreciate it. Also, if you're interested, I started a new soap making group on Facebook. It's called Tree Marie Soapworks, and it's a closed group, so you have to ask to join. And it's for asking questions and learning and sharing and encouraging others in their soap making journey. And please read the rules. Now I'm stamping these cube stamps, and I got this stamp from Brambleberry, but I don't think they carry it anymore, but I really like the look of it. And the first one and second one I stamped a little too deep. Third one I really liked how it looked, and I just stamped it almost all the way down, and it came out really nicely. This one is my favorite. And then the next one I stamped it too far down on the upper right corner, and so I got the edge of the stamp in the corner, and you can see here. But overall, I think they came out really nicely, and I would do this again. I really love the look. Thank you for joining me today, and if you appreciate this video, just give me a thumbs up and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, and also share this video, and have a great day.